You know what we all take for granted nowadays? The third dimension. That's right, all you spoilt brats comparing water physics and fruit explosions in these multi-million AAA productions, you forget that back in the day, we'd have to make do with just 2 axes of movement. Ridiculous.
It was a simpler time. Back when gameplay was firmly established as move side to side and don't get hit. And nobody was better at the sideways shuffle than our princess wrangling plumber, Mario. He is the most iconic face in gaming, and with good reason given his near flawless record of exceptional platformers. His seal of impeccable quality wasn't always guaranteed, however. In 1995, consoles were just breaking into fully fledged 3D, and it was a lawless land. Many daring pioneers hoped their three-dimensional adaptations would strike it rich, but plenty of 2D icons fumbled to transition to 3D, ending up with nothing more than fool's gold. We're talking about Sonic here. It's a subtle metaphor. Cough. It didn't help that Mario was late to the party. Western audiences got the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn in 1995, but it would take another year for the Nintendo 64 to arrive. A large reason for this was apparently so that legendary game designer Shigeru Miyamoto and his team could perfect the upcoming launch title, Super Mario 64.
Expectations were sky high. I mean, this was their main man. Mario couldn't miss. And yet, everyone else had failed to crack the magic 3D formula. They'd need something beyond any of our wildest comprehension. The mad bastards, they did it!
The vibrant levels, the whimsical enemies, the delightful music, the way Mario moved gracefully, running and jumping and diving and swimming, all of this in glorious 3D! Translating the unbridled joy of a Mario game into a completely different format that still controlled so well that it even holds up as a masterpiece by today's standards, well, I mean, it was nothing short of revolutionary. So how exactly did Nintendo get everything so right on their very first attempt? What made Super Mario 64 the perfect platforming playground? And just how did this groundbreaking title influence almost every other 3D game that came after, platformer or otherwise?
We'll get to that, but first, we've just been told that someone's got a lovely cake for us. Oh no, we hope that means it's a literal delicious treat and not, the internet slang, because we can't deal with another HR incident in the office. Jesus Christ. I'm James from TripleJump, and this is Game Changers.
Let's go!
Now, we're no strangers to technological advancements in the video game industry, but amongst the never-ending obsession about the number of bits, the rays traced and terrors flopped, the biggest leap forward was undoubtedly the jump from 2D to 3D.
Now, these innovations rarely stem from just one source operating in a vacuum, and sure enough, Mario 64 wasn't the first ever 3D platformer. Not by a long shot, actually. It's widely accepted that Alpha Waves, released in 1990 for the Atari ST, was the first recognizable 3D platformer by today's measurements. Yeah, it's mostly abstract bouncing triangles, but hey, we all gotta start somewhere, right? Plus it had 3 different axes of movement, which was insane for 1990. In 1995, Jumping Flash for the PlayStation evolved this concept, and an early platformer for the Sega Saturn, Bug, was technically 3-dimensional, but realistically it's something we'd probably now label as 2.5D. Still, for every mention of these early 3-dimensional pioneers, another name is never far behind: Super Mario 64. It might not have been the first ever, but it was the first true benchmark of how to nail freeform 3D platforming.
Compare it to games from just a couple of years prior, and you can see why. Pixels were gone, polygons were in, and everything suddenly felt more tangible, more real, more alive.
No abstract wireframe shapes, no 3D on a technicality, and none of those wobbly textures of early PlayStation and Saturn titles either. This didn't just feel like a trick of the hardware, this felt like the real deal. The future had arrived. Seeing the fully modelled castle grounds surrounded by beautiful trees and water, followed by an actually human-shaped, well, more or less, Mario jumping out of the pipe. Players couldn't believe their eyes. Even from the title screen, a Mario face that you could poke and prod and pull and stretch, that was an instant flex too, practically declaring, "Look upon the face of the future and despair." Well, everybody's copy did that, right? No? This flagship new Mario, along with the prototype new console codenamed Ultra 64, was first unveiled at the Shoshinkai 1995 show in Tokyo, and everyone was understandably awestruck. Several attendees recalled their shock even decades later in a piece from Retro Gamer. John Pickford of Software Creations, which would later become Acclaim Manchester, was amazed that this so-called temporary title looked so finished and playable, quote, "like nothing else I'd ever seen." Mark Jones, artist for Ocean, called the graphics jaw-dropping, saying, quote, "round things actually looked round." Oh, yeah, it does. I mean, get a load of that. Anyway, and Andrew Oliver of Glover Devs Interactive Studios marveled at how it was even a step up from the amazing 3D capabilities of the PlayStation. Witnessing this magic firsthand, people finally understood why Nintendo delayed their console for a whole year. This was like a tech demo had evolved exponentially into a fully fledged game utilizing the key features of the N64's hardware, especially that revolutionary analog stick.
And look, I get it, this is the part where you're expecting, hey, look at that funny shaped controller, isn't it so weird, hurdy-hurdy-hurdy. No. We're not going down that route. This is a three-pronged masterpiece, okay? You've got multiple options for holding it. You do that if you're an absolute crazy person. On the back, you got the trigger. How cool is that? It's your fault for not having free hands. You just don't understand how beautiful it is.
Mario 64 was so intrinsically linked to the hardware, even developed alongside it, that it's difficult to separate the two. But the real genius was how the hardware complemented the gameplay. Let's go!
The extra axis of movement opened up a whole new world for Mario. On his old, flat, boring plane of existence, you could run, jump, swim, crouch, maybe grab and throw a few things. Yeah, that's about it for basic movement. I mean, not counting power-ups, because that's cheating.
But in 3 dimensions, Mario's got all the moves, baby. We're talking long jumps, 2/3 of a triple jump, 3/3 of a triple jump, backflips, sideways somersaults, wall jumps, wall kicks, belly flops, wall belly flop, kick flips to indie pop, shove it's, whoa, rad, dude. And he even had 2 speeds of swimming. Whoa, slow down there, Michael Phelps. This wealth of new options helped players adapt to that extra freedom of 3D movement because, let's remind ourselves, this wasn't nearly as natural to players in the mid-90s, which was blatantly apparent when you look at the tentative walking and sporadic jumps from that very first gameplay demo. The analog stick was vital here, as without it, 3D Mario simply wouldn't have been the same. Movement felt much more intuitive, and stick sensitivity meant that you could go faster or slower depending on how far you moved that stick. Yet another feature we all just take for granted these days.
The opening castle was a perfect testbed for trying out all of these new moves. A wide open area with vivid colours eagerly inviting you to just mess around and bask in Mario's graceful agility.
Climb a tree, take a dip in the water, maybe do a majestic triple jump resulting in you face planting the front of the castle, all for the pure joy of it. The game also introduced punch and kick moves, along with the running dive, which helps tackle enemies a bit easier, as you realise the old reliable jump on head routine is just a little bit trickier in 3D. Luckily, another simple yet crucial addition helped with any depth perception issues with that extra dimension. We're talking, of course, about the shadow. Now, you knew exactly where you'd land, making platforming even more intuitive. He also introduced what's now a mainstay for 3D platformers, the legendary ground pound, also known as the hip drop, the butt bash, or El Rotunda Bunda. Oh yeah, sorry. Not only useful for enemies and puzzles, this also stopped your momentum in mid-air, adding yet another layer of control.
And that momentum was a key feature. The intention was to have the player constantly moving, so navigation had to be smooth, jumps flowing one into another seamlessly.
Maybe they focused a little bit too hard on recreating that sense of inertia, which did make movement a tad finicky. I mean, Mario took a second to get up to speed, and once he was up to speed, he had a wider turning circle, occasionally causing problems with ledges or hitting that sideways somersault. Swimming also felt slightly cumbersome, and obviously it meant less variety because you didn't have access to all the fun jumping maneuvers, what with the nature of, being underwater and all. I don't know if you've tried jumping while underwater, it's not easy. But honestly, these are minor complaints considering just how close they got to perfect the first time around, especially when compared to other contemporary platformers. Yes, I'm looking at you, Bubsy 3D. Mario's movement was the first thing that Miyamoto and co focused on, tweaking and tinkering to near perfection, as he wisely believed that the success of the game lived and died on the controls. Another revolutionary component was the camera.
So we know that the camera gets a lot of flack for being, how should we say, we know the camera gets a lot of flack for being a bit awkward. Oh, really? Really, we're doing this? Oh, bloody yes. The camera was awkward. It frequently got stuck on scenery, and it basically just had a mind of its own. But the key breakthrough wasn't necessarily about the camera. It was the fact that Mario moved in whatever direction you pushed the stick relative to where the camera was facing. Oh, God.
Most early 3D titles either had tank controls, with the movement being based on a character's direction and positioning, or they had fixed viewpoints with static backdrops. And you could include the isometric view into that category as well, which, again, simulated 3D technically, but didn't really ever feel like true 3D. But here, if you push forward on the stick, you go forward in that direction. It is that simple. It doesn't matter where the character model is facing, because the controls are dynamically tied to the camera at all times. So for all the complaints about that awkward camera, and they are valid, this was still a monumental achievement, and a formula that almost every third-person title has followed since. For how intuitive it feels, this now standardized system wasn't easy to create. Nintendo coder Giles Goddard, who incidentally was the guy responsible for that stretchy Mario face on the start screen, amongst many other accomplishments, said in a 2001 interview of NGC magazine that they went through thousands of camera systems over quite a few months. So, believe it or not, that finicky camera could have been a whole lot worse.
With movement pretty much perfected and the camera, well, good enough, it's time to see the environments where Mario was showing off all of these sweet moves.
Let's go!
In 2D platformers, progression is usually obvious. Typically left to right, maybe a little bit of up and down to really shake things up, but generally speaking, you know where you're meant to be heading.
However, throw in that extra dimension, and suddenly, players can choose to wander off in any damn direction they choose, so guiding them the right way becomes so much trickier. You're having to juggle a lot of considerations with this design. You want to provide freedom in this three-dimensional space, otherwise they might as well be going from left to right again. However, you don't want them getting lost and frustrated. You need to provide satisfying platforming and puzzles with enough options to solve it in a variety of ways, but not too challenging that players prefer to take that obscure shortcut and skip all the good stuff that you spent so long perfecting. Yet you have to have those shortcuts, you can't get rid of them because they're vital to having this freedom of exploration, and oh man, it's a real conundrum. If anyone could manage it though, it's Nintendo. Outstanding level design has always been a Mario trademark. There are even countless videos detailing the genius of Super Mario Bros. 1-1 level, pixel by painstaking pixel. For Mario 64, this castle was the perfect playground for newcomers to learn the ropes, without enemies or hazards. I mean, unless you drown in the moat, which, no one would do that. We didn't do that, don't shut up. For more confident players though, it takes just seconds to get into the castle, learn that devastating news that actually there isn't any cake after all, what? And not much longer before you jump into the first painting world, Bob-omb Battlefield.
Instantly, your ears are hit with perhaps the greatest piece of music on Earth. That's right, you heard me, Beethoven. Move over, Mozart. Oh, keep whining about that achy breaky heart, Mr. Cyrus.
Then, a few hours later, once you've finally stopped dancing like an idiot and thought, yeah, we should probably carry on with the game, you realise that these first few levels are perfectly designed to ease players into this new style of platformer. Here in World 1, there are no pitfalls of doom, enemies are slow, easily avoidable for the most part, and mostly optional. unless you have that same psychotic energy as Chris Pratt.
And I spent hours of my life stomping Koopas.
For moving platforms, for ground-poundable logs, for steep slopes, for throwable bob-ombs as a throwback to the 2D Koopa shells and other grabbable items of previous games, all of it smoothly and instinctively teaches us more of Mario's abilities. I mean, it's not completely without danger, mind you, as the scary chain jump, the bombardment of water balloons, the rolling balls of death and the literal bombs on legs all drive us to keep moving, keep pushing forward, all the way up the mountain to overthrow King Bob-omb by, well, throwing King Bob-omb. This certainly isn't the last time you'll be chucking royalty around, as this test of the full 360-degree movement is repeated several times, mainly against the King of Koopas himself, Mr. Bowser. World 2, Whomp's Fortress, introduces more challenging platform sections, along with some pitfalls of doom, so watch out, and then there's the sleeping piranha plant that you can sneak past if you're very delicate with the analog stick, once again showing off its versatility. Jolly Roger Bay serves as your first proper swimming lesson, which, sure, like the camera, wasn't exactly perfect, but it was a solid first attempt in 3D space. And then there's Cool Cool Mountain, which has you sliding down slopes, navigating slippery surfaces and other hazards. As you go further and further into the game, each weird and wacky world seemed to offer a new surprise. The cannons in Bob-omb Battlefield, the shipwreck of Jolly Roger Bay, lethal lava land's perilous magma, the changing water levels of Wet Dry World, the spooky shenanigans of Big Boo's Haunt, tiny huge islands shifting sizes, tick-tock clocks platform speeds which change based on the time of the clock when you first jump in. There is so much stuff to cover, I'm running out of breath.
Like any great Mario game, a magical new twist awaited you around every corner, and each new star felt like a clever new puzzle to solve, which were mostly intuitive. Okay, one exception that comes to mind being the whole blast away the wall silliness in Whomp's Fortress. How the hell is an 8-year-old child meant to figure that out?
It also felt so much more varied than simply running to the finish line, with challenges like finding a mama penguin's lost child, shell surfing on lava, raising up a sunken ship from the depths, or dealing with all manner of star thieves from vultures to eels to very cheeky monkeys. And true to the philosophy of the game, many stars gave you the freedom to reach them however you'd like, rewarding clever platforming and prompting you to experiment with the new moveset. This experimentation translated to the castle area itself, being its own traversable hub world full of secrets to uncover, rather than just a glorified level select screen. Among those secrets were the special caps Mario could wear, helping with certain specific challenges, the highlight of which being the wing cap, which allowed you to soar through the air like a majestic mustachioed eagle.
Each level evoked freedom, and that freedom even extended to which stars you'd collect in whichever order you wished.
Never were you truly stuck, forced to complete one specific challenge if you didn't want to, and you only needed 70 stars out of 120 for the final showdown with Bowser. Now, these Bowser stages themselves were the exception to the Go Anywhere design, as their layout evoked more of a classic 2D Mario feel, with one main path made to test all of your platforming skills so far.
Remember when I said Miyamoto's team spent ages getting Mario's movements just right? Well, this left remarkably little time for the levels, which according to Miyamoto himself, came together at the very end in a single burst of energy almost thrown together.
Now, the original plan was for somewhere between 32 and 40 courses, co-director Takashi Tezuka revealed to Nintendo Power. That's somewhat more than the 15 stages we ended up with the rest being cut or integrated into existing worlds. This final dash to stitch together levels makes some of the worlds even more impressive, though we'd be lying if we said they were all created equal. Aspects like the sunken town in Wet Dry World were certainly mysterious, but they seemed to be hastily added in from an earlier level concept, and personally speaking, I have far fewer memories of Dry Docks and Snowman's Land, just seeming to miss that special something that helps all those other levels stand out in your mind. In terms of game flow, while Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride had great core concepts, at least on paper, the fact that both ended up being more linear paths, which needed repeating every single time you went for another star run, also betrayed that free-flowing nature of previous stages. Perhaps another hint at the tight turnaround of these levels.
For the most part though, these worlds were an absolute blast to explore, There was an undeniable magic to Mario 64, and we've covered a lot of that, but some of that magic is much harder to define.
Let's go!
Anyone familiar with the game has to admit that Super Mario 64 has a bit of a strangeness to it.
Maybe it's the almost liminal spaceness to the practically deserted castle, the early 3D graphics lending a somewhat dreamlike quality to each world, or the fact that the internet as we know it was only just blossoming at that stage, making it very easy to spread rumours and misinformation. Good job that never happens nowadays, right? However you swing it, the game is steeped in myth and mystery.
Now, the game's insistence on rewarding your curiosity only heightened those urban legends, not to mention the cut content revealed in the years that followed. And one of the biggest questions about Mario 64 was, where exactly is his brother Luigi?
Fans were convinced he was hidden away somewhere, fueled mostly by his sign on the courtyard fountain statue. Yeah, to most regular players it's highly blurred and barely legible, so why would we spend any more time thinking about it? But to the real truth seekers, it clearly read, L is real 2401. Well, what did this mean? Was 2401 the amount of coins needed for the big L to show up? The amount of laps you needed to run around the fountain? A future release date maybe? Luigi's PIN number? Okay, so this interpretation is reaching a fair bit. Some fans reasonably suggest that it says Eternal Star in very blurry writing. Others point to the reused asset in Ocarina of Time, which in that game read Giant Dead Dodongo, and some just reasonably assumed that it was pointless gibberish. But if Yoshi was included as a bonus cameo for gaining all 120 stars, then why not Luigi as well? Well, in an absolutely wild twist, this insane theory actually came true. Sort of. A sizable data leak from Nintendo in 2020 revealed, among other things, some source code for Mario 64, which showed character models of our boy Luigi. There he is! And get this, it happened 24 years and 1 month after the game's original release.
See, it was real, it's real, unlike all those fake moon landings and all of that round earth nonsense as well. Everybody knows that's flat, and don't even get started on gravity, which is obviously a cover-up settle for down, Half-Life champ. 3. Let's Think just about it. move Yeah, you that's out of
right.
here where you can't hurt anyone or yourself. Obviously, Nintendo didn't intentionally leak something based on a smudged asset from a decades-old game. That would be ridiculous.
Most projects have had plenty of cut content stashed away in their code, and besides, Miyamoto and others already confirmed in an interview from 1996 that they planned to include Luigi, saying that, quote, until February, he was in the game. Still, it is fascinating and only slightly haunting to see the lanky brothers character model stitched together and in full working order in the game. Plenty of other mysteries have surrounded Mario 64, like the Please Walk Quietly signs, the floating Wario head originating from an E3 demo, that missing fourth yellow cap switch, and an increasing number of creepypasta-esque horror stories. So why are we focusing on all this? Well, one, because it's another example of this game's enduring legacy that has so much mythos surrounding it, and two, because it stemmed from the spirit of discovery that runs through the very veins of Mario 64. A game where entire worlds are hidden away in paintings, behind windows, in the basement, even in the skylight. It feels like there are so many unknowns still left to uncover.
And free, because these mysteries is just pretty cool to talk about, okay? And look, there's no harm in indulging in a few silly urban legends. Okay, well, maybe I take that back. Look, go back over there. You always take things too far.
On a similar note, this constant experimentation spawned a huge speedrunning community as well, constantly pushing the boundaries of the game to discover new glitches and skips. That never-ending staircase was an architectural marvel when you first came across it. Seeing someone skip past it with some crazy gravity-defying backwards long jump is even more impressive. You can also clip through a vital star door using Mips the Rabbit, who, by the way, was named after the N64's microprocessor, and was one of the first models created in the game. Countless strategies have been adopted and perfected by the speedrunning community, and secrets are still being uncovered to this day, which is mind-blowing.
Now, some might see these skips and think of Mario 64 as just an easily breakable game full of glitches, and look, the only correct response to that is, "I'll grow up." Of course, even the most robust of games will eventually be broken by speedrunners anyway, and plus this is more of a testament to the core controls and design that Nintendo's philosophy of freedom and creativity can evolve even beyond the limits of the game's creators.
Let's go!
Super Mario 64's staggering influence on the landscape of video games cannot be overstated. If you've ever played a 3D platformer, hell, if you've ever played a 3D game, then there's a good chance its roots can be traced all the way back to this polygonal plumber.
Naturally, this shaped the design of their console's most iconic titles, seen most clearly with Nintendo's second-party powerhouse, Rare. Banjo-Kazooie is perhaps the most well-known early addition to the newly emerging scene, and later this was followed up by Donkey Kong 64 and Conker's Bad Fur Day, which each adapted the formula with more elaborate level design, improved controls and camera, and even more collectibles. Good lord, we're running out of pockets for all of these MacGuffins, come on. Platformers previously struggling with the transition suddenly had a benchmark to strive towards, kickstarting a golden age of 3D mascot platformers. The likes of Glover, Gex, Ape Escape, Rayman 2, Croc, Rocket, Robot on Wheels, which is criminally underrated by the way, Jersey Devil, and the following generations built upon this with Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Psychonauts, Sly Cooper, and the undisputed pinnacle of gaming excellence, Shadow the Hedgehog. Oh god, that felt wrong to say even as a joke. PlayStation's own legendary mascot, Crash Bandicoot, also released in 1996, being developed parallel to Mario and achieving its own impressive breakthroughs.
With a more linear approach to progression and maybe a bigger focus on pure platforming, it was a more direct adaptation from that 2D design, but no less influential and entertaining, so props to the Bandicoot on that one.
Once Spyro arrived on the scene in 1998 though, the paradigm shift was well and truly underway, and with the Purple Dragon's distinctive, wide-open levels, hub world, and intuitive 3D movement, Mario's influence was clear. We're not being presumptuous there, by the way. Spyro developer Michael John literally confirmed this, saying Insomniac used the gameplay of Mario as a launchpad to build a character fundamentally fun to control. We've even seen some lovely throwbacks to that era in recent titles, like A Hat in Time or Yooka-Laylee, and excellent co-op adventures that evoke the spirit of Mario 64 for more than one player, like It Takes Two or Sackboy: A Big Adventure.
Mario 64's legacy stretched well beyond platformers, however.
John Pickford, previously of Acclaim, said that developers would look to Mario 64 for guidance on controls or camera systems, even more than 10 years later apparently. He even suggests that Tomb Raider took notes from the first Mario demo in 1995 to help with swimming controls in their title release just 1 year later. Exploring the vivid environments of Mario 64 also inspired the creation of Kingdom Hearts after a chance meeting between Squaresoft and Disney representatives. The game's non-restrictive levels could even be considered an early prototype for the dominant open-world design that has slowly permeated every aspect of modern gaming.
After all, Mario encouraged and rewarded going off the beaten path, discovering secrets and shortcuts, solving challenges your own way. In other words, blame Mario for Ubisoft being how they are.
Even the simple aspect of character movement, acting relative to a moving camera, changed everything. Of course, aspects like fixed camera perspectives and tank controls would still produce some absolute classics like your Final Fantasies and your Resident Evils, but there's a reason why we rarely see that approach in modern game design. It's also worth noting the impact of the Nintendo 64 hardware itself. Mario's fluid movement wouldn't have been possible without a revolutionary analog stick after all, and that thumbstick soon became standard across all consoles. As did the idea of controlling your camera with your right thumb, as the C buttons, originally designed for camera work, later evolved into a second thumbstick, becoming second nature for millions of gamers of all genres.
This unusual three-pronged design wasn't so widely adopted, however, which, if you ask me, is a missed opportunity. Look, the more prongs, the better. That's just simple maths, come on.
Over a quarter of a century later, the biggest game developers still look back on Super Mario 64 with reverence. Speaking to VG247 in 2021, Tim Schafer, of LucasArts and Double Fine fame, called Mario 64 an epiphany, citing it as the biggest single influence on Psychonauts. Valve's Gabe Newell told CVG in 2011 that Mario 64 was, quote, still my favourite game of all time, and that it convinced me that games were art. And Dan Houser, co-founder of GTA studio Rockstar Games, once famously stated, anyone who makes 3D games who says they've not borrowed something from Mario 64 or Zelda is lying. In a 1996 developer roundtable interview, Shigeru Miyamoto said, "We really did want to change the culture of gaming, and it was in that spirit that we made Mario 64. And turns out, well, that's exactly what happened.
Taken as just a game, Super Mario 64 is still one of the best of all time. The simple act of controlling Mario as he hops, skips and jumps through a banquet of beautifully crafted levels, well, it couldn't help but put a smile on anyone's face.
But all of this was achieved without any established formula of how platforming should even work properly in 3 dimensions, made it a technical and artistic marvel.
As far as true game changers go, Super Mario 64 was one of the biggest catalysts for change in video gaming history, and still one of the very best games of all time. And for that, we'd say you've more than earned a slice of cake, Mario. Look, a lovely bit of carrot cake. There you go, buddy. Look, it's got carrots in. It's healthy. Look, do you want this or not? Because I will eat this. I'll eat it. Oh. It's good cake. It's good. Bye.